Good morning, good evening, colleagues. This session, which is more on the application of the WEFE Nexus, we'll have an opportunity to further deep dive into some of the issues that were highlighted in previous session. And to lead this session, we have a stellar panel of experts. All of them you can see on their screen. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to read out their bios. But this session is also critical for the next session, which is the which is the group work. So this session will sort of provide us some of the key insights and steer us towards the group work, which is the most important part of this webinar today. And to just to highlight, each of the speakers will be speaking for 5 minutes, and they will be addressing very specific questions, which I will pose to them as I start. And to kick off this discussion, I would like to first invite Mr. Deepak Gawali, academician at the Nepal Academy of Science and Technology and a well-known scholar on Nexus issues, particularly from the cultural theory perspective. Deepak ji, in your opinion, what are some of the major challenges associated with uptake and application of the Nexus approach in the HKS region? And how can some of those challenges be addressed? So if you could share from your experience, over to you.
Okay, I have 5 minutes, right?
Yes.
Okay, you put me in a very difficult position because the questions ICIMOD and you have put up demand a full semester, each one of them, a full university semester on each one of them. But I'll try and address them in 5 minutes. The challenges Nexus approach is the latest avatar in this holy grail search for integration, systems approach, holistic thinking, and we have a long record of that. Okay, and there's been an equally long record of failures. Whether it is IWRM or MDGs or whatever. Okay, now what this does is why Nexus approach is a bit more hopeful than these other past efforts, is that it challenges us to move away from the physical environmental symptoms to the more substantive social drivers. The political economy of our drivers, the main being that the issue of social justice and the very notion of how we should actually live. Okay, now this poses several challenges. First is what I have been calling silo deafness. And that has to be, every silo is deaf to other silos. And that's the experience of all of us who have had to manage some of these, big government departments or whatever. The WEF challenge is a wicked problem challenge. It's a challenge where we can't even agree on the definition of the problem. Okay, and it is not amenable to textbook solutions. We have to go for uncomfortable knowledge. And that means generating uncomfortable knowledge to start with. Okay. Now, what this really means is that the silo deafness has to be challenged. And perhaps the easiest way, for all agencies like ICIMOD or EU or others, is to begin by looking at these different silos in different countries that we work in and see how much they have internal pluralization. I'll come with an example of water. Are the water institutions completely dominated by civil engineers? Or does it even have lawyers and sociologists and hydrologists and meteorologists? Often you find it doesn't. There's one single discipline dominating, whether it's the agriculture ministry or department or water or whatever. Okay, so this is where the silo deafness has to be seen, and it must be silo implementation challenge really starts from assessing how pluralized is each one of the silos. Okay, because without that you're not going to get out of the deafness. Because essentially in silo, the wicked problem of WEF means the solution feeding is not important because solutions are not going to be accepted by others. Okay, it's problem feeding. And previous speakers have mentioned consistently, all of them actually, on this need for dialogue in different ways. Okay. Now, the problem with dialogue is this. Dialogue is always between contending positions. And very often in transboundary waters, what we have is dialogue between very similar people. Take the Mahakali Treaty in Nepal, between Nepal and India. Last 25 years passed with much fanfare by 2/3 majority in the parliament, but dead in the water these last 25 years. Why? Now, it's not a Nepal-India problem, because Nepali hydrographs and Indian hydrographs are totally united in the need to build this 300-meter high dam. It's the activists on both sides of the border that don't agree with that. You're the social environmental activists. Okay, so the question is moving away from what we call silo solution preaching, if I may use an even more rude word, to problem feeding, not solution feeding, but problem feeding. This leads to three other issues. One of them is that to institutionalize this nexus approach, one has to concentrate on a few areas which are naturally nexused. Okay, one of them is on each sector's waste. Now the problem is each sector sees the other sector as a repository for its waste. Energy sector or the food sector is the best. We think all our rivers and lakes, freshwater rivers and lakes, are repositories for all our waste, from our bathroom waste, food waste, to just about everything. Okay. Now, so the climate problem is another classic example. The energy sector thinks that the atmosphere is a repository for its waste. Okay. Hence, banning the use of the word waste and replacing it with nutrient recycling. We may not fully 100% ban waste, but let's ban the word at least and shift our thinking to nutrient recycling. Okay, that's one of the first steps. The other is to concentrate on natural sector interstices, as I call them. Storage, transport. These are two areas of water, energy, and food. The storage and transport of each one of them, where intersections occur, and where we really have to tackle them by trying to understand the footprint of each. Water footprint, energy footprint, and devise policies to reduce those footprints, okay, in each one of these sectors, in the storage, in the transport, okay. And then finally, what we have to do is to separate, in the nexus institutionalization, separate goal setting from goal achieving institutionally. And the Europeans are here and they should be very happy, because I'm a great fan of one of the greatest nexus success stories, which the Europeans have done a very bad job of actually propagandizing, which is the cleanup of the Rhine River, the sewer of Europe, and it was cleaned up. Now, the real message from a cultural theory perspective, as you mentioned it, is that somehow, by fluke, the Sandoz spill of 1986 or whatever, they managed to separate goal setting, which was done at the highest level of these 6 countries of the Rhine Basin, and left the implementation to the lowest unit of governance, which is the cantons and the landers. It would be the districts in India, the Gaonpalikas in Nepal, and others. Okay. Now, this really allowed that institutional, a natural institutional implementation versus monitoring to be really done well. When you have these high-level institutions like the Rhine Commission, if it had been left to the Rhine Commission, the Rhine would never be clean. And let's be clear about it, okay? But because there were very insightful statesmen, a Dutch environment minister at that time, after the Sandoz spill, who realized that this is not going to work, that working only at that large hierarchic level of nation state and even worse, international institutions, is just not going to work. They have to do the goal setting, the larger vision setting, and the monitoring, but the implementation of nexus achievements have to be done at the lowest unit of governance by bringing together these contending views, these contending partners and their social carriers, which is bureaucratic hierarchism, market individualism, and activist egalitarianism. They all at the local level have to be found, not just space at the table for their voices to be heard, but also responded to. It's no good just being heard. That'll lead to a cacophony and nothing else. But the response from the others, and the others remodeling their own plans and programs and views as per the problem feeding done by these other social solidarities. So I think I'll stop with that and we'll take this forward in the discussions.
Yeah. Thank you, Deepakji, for highlighting very specific suggestions from your experience and trying to highlighting the problem feeding agenda, which is more critical in my opinion. Now let us move on, and at this point in time, I would like to turn to Ms. Ludmila Kiktenko. She is the manager of the Environmental Management Program, Regional Environment Center for Central Asia, correct for short. Ludmila, if you can, from your experiences in the Central Asia region, highlight the ways the Nexus dialogue and particularly the Nexus games that you mentioned, how did they contribute to such shared understanding among different countries? And most importantly, how did you manage to get the Nexus approach integrated in two of the intergovernmental processes in the region? So over to you, Ludmila.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this very interesting, intensive seminar. Actually, I thought just talking about potentials of moving from conceptual aspect, yes, of WEFE Nexus to practical application. In Central Asia, we decided to introduce, how to say, to have an opportunity to apply it practically through so-called demo projects. And we started implementation of 4 demo projects, and I will tell here only 2 of them in order to explain how this WEFE Nexus approach is applied practically. So one demo project is on transboundary level. It is Tuyamuyun Hydro Complex, a transboundary water facility used for irrigation, energy generation, and household purposes. So called classic multi-purpose facility. The main challenge here, for sure, there are always a lot of challenges on water facilities, but here we focus on sedimentation, which now reached 85%. And this is a huge and important facility for million people. And you can imagine that this level of sedimentation means that the facility at the level of already stop its operation, and it demands a huge investments to be recovered. Okay, so here with EU Nexus Dialogue project, we facilitated establishment of multi-country and multi-sector working group, conduct complex assessments at the territory. And these assessments include climate change impact, socio-economic, environment, sedimentation level, and sedimentation composition. Accordingly, all our dialogues, they are not theoretical about WEFE in ideal world, but we are talking about this concrete facility with this concrete problem with different point of views, yes, of interest. So, and all this assessment helped us to have all information in hands. We know residents, we know users, challenges, data, needs, everything. So currently we are in the process to identify available technical solutions to sedimentation in order then to select the most appropriate one, for sure to pass them through cost-benefit assessment. It would be for sure also interesting to pass them through what if assessment or this trade-offs assessment. And in order to develop the most, the idea of the most applicable solutions like project, which could be then transformed as an investment project with business model. How these investments can be returned in order countries to be ready to discuss this investment project. Because yes, focus of our Nexus in Central Asia is strong focus on investment projects of regional importance. Okay, and for sure doing all this and understanding the potential investment project, WEF-based investment project, it helped us to have a concrete subject for WEF Nexus cooperation agreements between 2 countries. So we are not again talking theoretically that this is important and you will benefit, but we are talking, have a look, you have this facility, these problems, you can solve these problems this way, and it demands this change in your agreements. Okay. And in order you could receive investments. What challenges? I believe I have not time to talk about second. I can explain it just
Ludmila, if you
after.
can wrap up in 1 minute, please.
Yes, okay. So what challenges we identify? In theory, we all understand the logic and potential effect of doing all exercises, planning, implementation jointly. Yeah, this is great. Ongoing reform of governmental systems in countries also support strengthening evidence of climate change. Unfortunately, it also helps us to push dialogues, economic decline, deficit of national budget, donor priorities to regional projects, all this help us. At the same time, the biggest challenges towards Nexus institutionalization. We really have no real interest from financial institutions to prioritize projects with WEFE Nexus approach. We have limited evidence base for the governments to prove the benefits of Nexus approach and to show how it can be institutionalized. We have no tools to support Nexus-based assessments, communication, decision-making, projects elaboration, at least in Central Asia. We have no access to investment decision process on the governmental level and limited opportunity for cooperation with other Nexus projects because of different reasons, but no matter. And about the last question about WEFE Nexus in a transboundary context. Our experience says that it is absolutely possible, but demands more efforts and facilitation. So we need examples and evidences that it works, supporting tools, technical dialogues to find technical solutions, and policy dialogues to build political environment and finding water, energy, food trade-off. Actually, that's all from my side. Thanks.
Yes. Thanks, Ludmila, for sharing those useful insights from the Central Asia region. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Ghulam Rasool, Chief Economist at ICIMOD. Dr. Rasool, from your experience, what are some of the potentials for the Nexus application in the region, and how can those be realized? Over to you, Dr. Rasool.
Oh, thank you, Raj, for the nice question. And I would like to thank Deepakji and Ludmila for very nice highlighting very important point. And I would like to, on this context, to highlight what are the particularly potential of the Nexus in the HKH region. I think my two colleagues, Sunita and Babar Khan, very nicely highlighted this point. I would just add some of these points and emphasize some of the points. For HKH region, all of you know that our situation is a bit different from many other regions. We are facing a challenge of too much water as well as too less water. This is a very peculiar to HKH region. If you look at the average per capita water availability, HKH is very rich region in terms of water. But if you look at the water of the different region and different timing, particularly all the HKH region, if you look at the Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, very rich in water. But if you go to the Pakistan, northwestern India, Afghanistan, water is very scarce. So in terms of region, there is a very skewed distribution. But in terms of most important in timing, most of the water coming basically in during the monsoon season. I think the 70-80 days, 80% of water come. And from the November to March, April, there is no rain and no water, actually very little coming. And this is the reason people need water for their food, for their irrigation, for their navigation, for their drinking water, all, and they suffer a lot. These two peculiarities actually brings the opportunity for this region to look at Nexus and look at a transboundary scale. Because as you all know that because of uneven distribution of water and interdependencies of different countries or different other countries, is very huge. For example, all the countries, if flood happens in Nepal, that immediately affect India, even if it goes to Bangladesh. Something happened in India, it is directly affect the Bangladesh. So this is the connection between climate and disaster and resource use. Again, in terms of potential also, there is huge interdependencies. We all know that in Nepal, there is a huge potential for hydropower development of there and huge water resources. But this Nepal cannot or will, could not be developed that water resources alone, because it is that if they develop the water, the market is beyond their border. So if they don't have collaboration, Nepal alone cannot utilize or harness the potential of water resources. Despite huge water resources, hydropower resources, Nepal is suffering from energy, suffering for water. In rural areas, women spending 4 to 5 hours per day to just bringing water. So it is a huge human and social cost of that. But now question is how we can facilitate this for a transboundary collaboration to facilitate that. One of the example I can, because this is a very debatable, and this answer will depend who does this, because there is the idealistic world, there is the political issue, there is the economic perspective, environmental, social perspective, technical perspective, and political perspective. So of course there will be many opinion on that. But my point of view, for example, now Nepal is developing a number of small hydropower private, all that. This is good. This is addressing water energy security. But if we could plan properly, harness in a Nexus framework from transboundary using all the relevant countries properly, ideal world, then this hydropower in Nepal could help in downstream in Bihar in India in moderating their flood damage, could help in India, even in Bangladesh, to help their expanding their irrigation facilities. Again, in the downstream Bangladesh to managing even maybe the salt intrusion in the coming because of the climate change. So if we look at water has one of the two important characteristics of water. What is flowing down until you stop it, regulate it without huge environment. And another is water has both consumptive use and non-consumptive use. For example, the example of hydropower, this is a non-consumptive use of water. So if we can really plan well in properly transboundary way, same water you can use for generating energy, same water you can use even mitigating disaster, as well as same water you can use for irrigation, for navigation, for food production, even fisheries, aquaculture, even better environmental flow. Because during the dry season, environmental flow goes so low, many rivers now about to die in the dry season. So if we can plan properly, there is a huge potential, economic potential, social potential, political potential, even I will say environmental potential. But again, question will come, there is also number of cost. There is Christian nicely mentioned that there is a synergy, there is a trade-off. But we have to see what is the volume, how much synergy we are getting at what cost. So if cost is less, we have to try to optimize our benefit and for the benefit of the region. So I am very hopeful that this HKS region in the future, although there's a lot of political, of course, mistrust are there, but in the future, people will collaborate, cooperate, use the water transboundary river basin for harnessing them, for ensuring water, energy, food, and ecosystem, as well as for sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rasool, for highlighting some of those important aspects from your experience. Now, I'd like to invite Dr. Mahjabeen Abidi Habib. She is a socio-ecological resilience researcher from Pakistan. Dr. Mahjabeen, from your research and policy consultancy related work on resilience and land rights, if you could highlight the ways this nexus understanding could be improved more at the community level and or the local level? And from your experience, how the Nexus approach could be more adopted and applied at the local level, that would be very useful. You have 5 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you
Dr.
very
Khatri.
much. And thank you for inviting me to this important event. I'd like to first take you to a very particular place in Pakistan where the WEFE approach has grown organically. And when you transpose it with some of the frameworks that WEFE's conceptual frameworks, you see that this is an empirical case. The place I'd like to take you to is in Pakistan's salt range, which is in the Himalayan foot hills. This is a closed basin thorn forest where community managed rain-fed agriculture happens. In the Son Valley of the Salt Range, you will now see a Ramsar site of protected wetlands, where there is flamingo habitat. There are scientific bathymetric mappings of the water table and the wetlands. There are renewable energy solar panels that drive a community-controlled number of wells and tube wells to extract groundwater. How did this come to be? So the Son Valley story is really an interesting laboratory for learning because it's a closed basin water system where local accountability is very high. There's no one else to blame if water recharge and groundwater reduces. Rain and forest cover are the only sources of water in this valley. And the resilience challenge came some 20 years ago when the underground water table was over-harvested for growing cash crops. And really the response came from within community management to rise to the challenge by collaborating with expert networks of water, agriculture, energy, afforestation, and biodiversity experts. So we are really speaking about an area that is about 15,000 hectares of cultivated land with about 150,000 people populating it and 2,500 tube wells. And what we got was a deficit in the annual recharge because of over-extraction that was understood and measured by collaborative institutions at the request of community. So what we found over a 20-year period is the entire population's ability to coordinate and respond by shifting to cropping patterns that are less demanding and producing cash crops that are less water demanding, the monitoring of wetlands, the monitoring of wells for water quality and quantity, community afforestation and protection of the hills and the watersheds around the valley, wildlife protection, and controlling the number of tube wells in a micro fashion. And so what we see is community-led management and leadership with governance interlinkages that go far beyond the location into collaborations with WWF, the Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Council, the Agriculture Council, the microfinance institutions, and district extension services. So this is a story of a bottom-up organic WEFE approach that has shown itself to be a model in Pakistan. Quickly, I'd also like to share an experience now moving to a different geography of a transboundary water situation in Pakistan. We have a queue of transboundary collaborations that are at different stages of preparation, as was described, of evidence, nexus assessment, and nexus policy by Cesar Carmona Moreno. And so some are at data gathering stages, some are further advanced. This one was really a salvage operation in which in a high altitude wetland called Deosai National Park, a river diversion was conceived by federal government based on a very peculiar political narrative, which is if our neighbor is diverting river waters for hydropower, why can't we? And the salvaging operation involved a WEFE perspective to be first researched and articulated, and then woven into a policy narrative that creates a more protective and holistic framework for river diversion in a very fragile area. By the way, this work was done, led by Dr. Babar Khan, who is now at ICIMOD and was at that time working inside Pakistan. So really,
Dr. Habib, you have 1 minute, so if you could wrap up in 1 minute. Yeah.
Yes. So to wrap up, the national park river diversion was really has been put on a stay, I would say, because research was able to show that a WEFE Nexus would go into a non-virtuous cycle where river diversion would, the trade-off between ecosystem services of water catchment into the Indus River versus the hydropower gains would be a very small gain. So we have several of these in Pakistan waiting to be cultivated, and I think they are each worthy of further work with Iran, Afghanistan, India, and India. Again, we have 3 or 4 cases that have obstacles that would benefit greatly from a more complex WEFE-based approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Habib. Thank you for bringing in those local perspectives and the role of the local government. Those were very useful. We will be moving on to the next session, which is the group work.